Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Kimberly Hepner, and today is July 8th, 2014. Don't forget, when we're not on your television screen, you can always check us out. You can go to arh.noaa.gov or simply type in weather.gov and navigate to the destination of your choice. Also, we have a telephone line for you. Weather information line is 1-800-472-0391, and you can also find us on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Now on to the important topics of the day. We still have a flood advisory out currently for the Chena River. It's still flooding near the North Pole area, and down near flood banks it is near Bankfull, so please keep an eye out for any of the products as we're just on the Bankfull limits near Fairbanks. So stay tuned for these product updates. Right now it's going to expire later tonight. However, that might be extended with the additional rainfalls that are occurring around the area. Fire danger is a little bit lower than the normal as we're getting into our wet season, but these are the areas that should be on the lookout. We do have a few thunderstorms that are in the central interior locations, and these can always spark fires. And it's always important to address fires that you start and make sure you put them out, especially in these areas that are well grass covered. All right, now looking at the satellites to see what's going to be bringing our weather coming your way. Right here is a picture of the Bering with the western Aleutians, here Shemya. Putting that into motion, we basically have a large area of circulation, low pressure that's in the central part of the Bering, and this is helping to bring wraparound moisture and keeping low stratus and clouds all across the Bering. Watching that one more time, there's a good feed of moisture that's heading north towards the Gulf of Alaska, and as we look at a satellite closer to home, you can see this moisture slowly making its way up towards the Alaska Peninsula. Here's the low pressure out across the Bering, closer look with all the low clouds and stratus. Not too much fog reported lately, but we might see that change with a ridge that's pushing into the western part of the Aleutians in the near future. Across the Gulf of Alaska, also seeing some low clouds and stratus all along here. Weak low pressure is centered along the central interior, keeping clouds all across much of the state and including the Brooks Range. It's just the mountain tops are very cool, so on this image they kind of got whited out in that area. So southeast also in the clouds, not too much sunshine. You're lucky if you saw a peak of sunshine along the west coast, but perhaps a break or two will be in the near future. You'll have to stay tuned for the rest of our forecast. Putting that into spin, you could see there's nothing but more moisture coming in its way across the Alaska mainland and all the way through the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutian chain. Now, watching this spin one more time, there's the moisture. Another big plume of moisture that's heading up towards Kodiak Island. This is a low pressure system that we'll be talking about in just a moment. For now, this is what happened today. Here's the low pressure that's sitting out across the central part of the Bering, 1,002 millibar low, and some showers rotating around this system during the afternoon hours and up to the Kuskokwim Delta area, a few showers sparking a lot along the west coast. The interior saw most of the activity with thunderstorms along the Brooks Range and south through Fairbanks and the eastern Alaska Range. And across the Gulf waters, mainly just clouds and stratus, a few light showers in the mountainous areas along the Panhandle. And otherwise, across the Alaska Peninsula in Kodiak Island right now, kind of a break. They haven't seen any rain today, just clouds in these locations. However, as we head into your evening tonight, they might see a few showers moving up ahead of this system. that's coming up from the North Pacific. This is the next low pressure system that is just now deepening and heading north towards the Alaska Peninsula. A few showers, like I said, may work up ahead of it and get into Kodiak Island overnight, but they should be fairly light during the overnight hours. Light showers, it looks very green on the map. That indicates these are the areas that are most likely to see light rain and rain, not just heavy rain, but these are all light showers primarily, with weak upper level disturbances and a deep moisture profile all the way across the Gulf Coast waters and just inland. Any disturbance moving across the area, as you can see, there's a little kink in the bars here, and these are enough to produce some showers in the area. So they did have quite a bit of rainfall across the central interior during the last 24 hours. They saw 1 to 2 inches, and any additional rainfall will help fill those rivers, like I said, the Chena River, and we're also going to be keeping an eye on the Matanuska River as well, as they're getting close to bank full. So keep an eye out on that. There's going to be some patchy fog forming just off the northern slope area and back towards the northwest, so possible patchy fog there, and then across the eastern parts of the Bering we'll see some patchy fog moving back into these areas. Low pressure will continue out in the Bering, bring some light showers rotating around this low pressure system as it just sits there and idles during the overnight hours. This high pressure out to the west is going to slowly creep in, some fog associated with this. We'll be on the lookout for that into the western part of the Bering. And then as we head into your forecast on Wednesday, here's the low pressure system that's going to bring lots of moisture with it. Rainfall between 1 and 2 inches at least, with locally higher amounts across Kodiak first. As the system pushes up, expect the pressure gradient to tighten on the north end and east areas of this as the system moves up, and it'll be bringing some small craft to gale force winds as it moves north. But mainly for Wednesday, on the lookout over at Kodiak as the heavier rain starts setting in that area. Also, the Alaska Peninsula will see some rain tomorrow out of this system, with lighter rain inland across Bristol Bay. Along the central interior parts of the state, another round of showers and thunderstorms for you as low pressure continues across the central interior. High pressure just off the coast will keep some foggy conditions set in across the coastal areas. And even though we have some high pressure moving into the eastern part of the Gulf of Alaska, still expect to see some light showers develop at times as weak disturbances move aloft across the area. Now again, looking across the Bering, low pressure is still hanging out in the Bering, although weakening down to 1,008 millibars on Wednesday, and then fog and stratus will be all across again the Bering with some light shower activity, and the ridge kind of building into the western part of the Aleutians as we head through your Wednesday. And then for your Thursday forecast, expect this low pressure system to really start having its impact on the Gulf of Alaska, bringing a lot of rain all the way wrapped around back towards Bristol Bay. Strong winds associated with this will be mainly to the center of the low pressure system, so we'll see some strong winds picking up across the Kenai and the northern as we head into the day later on Thursday, all across the northern Gulf Coast, and expect moderate to heavy rainfall with this system as it moves north. It's taking kind of a northerly direction, and this ridge right now is keeping it from progressing any further eastward, so we'll have to watch how this system tracks over the next few days. And again, just expect some light shower activity maybe in the northern part of the southeastern locations, but mainly dry conditions across the rest of the southeast for your Thursday forecast. Showers with some isolated thunderstorms on Thursday for the central interior, lighter showers across the Brooks Range and across the northwest coastal areas, mainly over late showers over Seward, and across the eastern parts of the Bering Alaska Peninsula. A little bit windy conditions turning out of the northwest here with some light shower activity, but nothing like they're going to see ahead of this low pressure system. Ridging across the rest of the Bering, central Bering, including the Pribilops, should bring some pretty good fog back into that area over the water. Now, looking at your temperatures today, it did get quite warmest across the central interior areas with highs reaching up to 75 and 76. And across the southeast, they saw temperatures moderate into the mid 50s as they stayed under cloud cover all day. And along the coastal areas, they crept up into the lower 60s back towards the eastern part of the Kenai. As you look north, looking at temperatures reaching up into the upper 40s and at 37 at one point. And then as you head back towards the Seward Peninsula, temperatures rose into the upper 50s to lower 60s. And all of Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Delta area saw mainly temperatures in the low to mid 60s. And now the Alaska Peninsula a little bit cooler today with highs in the mid 50s and the upper 40s across the central and western Aleutians. Pribilofs were right there near 50 degrees today. And then for your temperatures tonight, not much change along the chain. We'll see temperatures dropping into the mid 40s, Alaska Peninsula in the lower 50s to upper 40s. Across the Bristol Bay area in the upper 40s. Warmest across central interior, temperatures getting into the lower 50s. Along the coastal locations, seeing temperatures in the mid 40s to low 30s as you head further in the areas where there's still some ice right off the coast. Now across the southeast and all along the Gulf, expect temperatures to stay in the lower 50 range. And looking at your forecast highs for tomorrow, temperatures will creep back to near 60, maybe popping out of the skies. They might see a few higher conditions in the mid 60s, depending on how much they break out tomorrow. Tomorrow along the rest of the northern Gulf Coast, expect temperatures to reach into the lower 60s with mid 70s all across the central interior. Coastal locations will mainly see mid 40s during the day, and along the Bristol Bay area expect temperatures in the upper 50s to lower 60s. For the rest of the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians, expect temperatures in the low to mid 50s. Now looking at your flying weather conditions for tomorrow, we're going to have MVFR across much of the state, some breaks in the MVFR, and IFR all across the Bering, parts of the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians. And then we'll also see cloudy conditions, MVFR in the morning, possibly breaking out across parts of the southeast with some IFR conditions ahead of that low pressure system. Now your passes in more depth, looking at Anatuvik Pass with possible thunderstorms, mainly VFR tomorrow, and Adigan Pass as well, thunderstorms VFR. And Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will be mainly in clouds, MVFR. And then Rainy Pass will be MVFR. Now Windy Pass will be MVFR. Isabel Pass will be MVFR, possibly clearing to VFR later in the day. And then Mentasta Pass will be MVFR to VFR. And Tanita will also be VFR condition. Portage Pass will mainly be MVFR. And Chilkoot and White Pass will be MVFR, possibly breaking out to VFR later in the day. Here's your freezing levels across the state. Freezing level is just north of the north coast there. And then we have 2,000 feet along the northern coast, and then 10,000 along the western Brooks Range. 8,000 feet or above across most of the interior, and between 6,000 to 8,000 across the Bering locations. Looking at your icing for tomorrow, mainly along the Bering, below 14,000 and above 8,000 and above 9,000 and below 13,000. Looking at your jet stream, low pressure dominating in the Bering, turn of direction around there, and mainly a westerly direction is south of the Aleutian chain. Tomorrow's 9,000 foot winds, change of direction over the low pressure system that's in the Bering, and then change of direction, but rather light across much of the interior. Looking at your tomorrow's turbulence, possibly creeping up into Kodiak Island, but didn't include it because of the timing. We weren't sure just yet, but that's looking more like Thursday night, but below 4,000 feet across the western part of the Aleutians. We'll be right back with your marine forecast.
So let's start here. First of all, how do you know how your plane is supposed to perform? How long it's going to take to get airborne? How far to clear that tree at the end of the runway that just happens to be exactly 50 feet tall? How do you know if it can clear that mountain that rises just past it? That's right, the POH, Pilot's Operating Handbook. Here are all the charts and graphs that let us calculate how the airplane is going to perform under specific conditions. The POH gives us all the numbers we need, right? Well, hang on a second. How do they get these numbers? Here's where they come from. The airplane manufacturer. And here's the airplane. Look at it. The paint's so glossy it looks like it's wet. The tires are perfectly inflated. Everything's lubed and brand new. The engine develops full compression. The rigging is correct. And here's the pilot, a meticulous professional who knows the airplane, knows all the physics of flight and all the tricks for getting max performance. A pilot who puts them into practice in the air every working day. That's the plane and the pilot behind the numbers, like a jockey on a thoroughbred. Now, of course, manufacturers want their performance numbers to look as good as possible, but they don't go for the absolute edges of the envelope in developing their figures. The fact is, the plane may perform better than the book indicates under certain conditions, because no heroic effort has gone into getting the absolute shortest landing distance or takeoff roll. The test pilot isn't dragging the plane in at the back end of the power curve and dropping it in on the runway to come up with the landing distance. The aircraft are operated normally. So, if they're operating the aircraft normally and we're operating the aircraft normally, why shouldn't we expect to duplicate the book performance figures? Let's start here, on the flight line. If these planes look like they're tired, they probably are. Look at those tires. If they're not properly inflated, it's going to cost you performance, not to mention jeopardize safety by increasing the chance of a blown tire. How old is your engine? Think it's developing as much power as it did when it was fresh? And what about all that extra weight that accumulates in the baggage compartment over the years? Bottom line, if it's not a new airplane, it's not going to perform like one. Clear prop. And here's the other half of the equation separating our performance from book performance. It's us. We aren't professional test pilots, and we can't fly as well. No big surprise there. Most of us haven't been trained that way, and we don't fly as much. Most public use airports have adequate margins of safety built into the airport design in terms of runway length and obstructions. But at some point, pilot sloppiness, plane limitations, and environmental conditions can combine in bad ways. Then you have dinged props, bent metal, or worse. So the bottom line, when you use the POH numbers to determine takeoff and landing performance, add a safety margin to the distances. The Air Safety Foundation recommends adding 50% of the book takeoff and landing distance to estimate how much runway you'll need. Here's an important statistic. There are about 50% more landing accidents than takeoff accidents. But takeoff accidents are more than 4 times as likely to result in fatalities. Takeoff combines high power and slow speed, a recipe for disaster if the aircraft is allowed to stall or control is lost. Pilots must be aware that power loss is a possibility on every takeoff. If the engine quits on a single-engine airplane, the pilot must quickly transition to a glide, maintain control, and fly the airplane all the way to the ground. An engine failure on a multi-engine airplane requires the pilot to maintain control, determine if a climb and return to the airport is possible, and if not, land the airplane off airport. In some ways, takeoffs are the most demanding operations for a general aviation pilot. Think about it. How long has it been since you last flew? Takeoff is one of the highest workload phases of flight. Checklists, ATC clearance, taxi instructions, aircraft configuration, and then the takeoff, managing power, airspeed, course, and attitude, while dealing with sometimes hostile atmospheric conditions, collision avoidance, and ATC instructions. And we may not have had our hands on an airplane in weeks. This is certainly one factor behind many takeoff accidents. Pilots can set themselves up for takeoff accidents before they even get to the runway. Improper configuration is another common factor cited in accident reports. Make sure flaps are set properly and the trim is adjusted correctly. If either is set incorrectly, you'll have a less than book performance takeoff, or worse. You're cleared to taxi into position and hold. Wait a second. Have you visually cleared the area? Even at towered airports, you need to check. Pilots have died from failing to follow this simple rule. Look for planes on short final and others that may have taken the active at intersections ahead of you or behind you. While we're on the subject of intersections, unless there is much more runway than you'll need, ASF recommends against intersection takeoffs. Remember, as a taxpayer, you're entitled to use all the runway. In the event of an emergency, that extra 1,000 or 2,000 feet could make the difference between a non-event and an accident. Okay, you've been cleared for departure. This is the germinating point for the #1 cause of takeoff accidents: loss of control. Loss of control accounts for almost 1/3 of these mishaps. This is what sends airplanes off the side of the runway. The rudder is the most critical element in maintaining directional control. Maybe you've got 2 left feet on the dance floor, but you'll need to know how to dance on the rudder pedals. Some pilots have never been taught, and others have forgotten. Of course, the ailerons have to be positioned relative to the wind, but there's not even a breeze today, remember? If you have a steerable nose or tail wheel, it's best to stay off the brakes until you need them to slow down. If you ride too high on the pedals, you may get braking action when you don't need it. That can result in lengthening the takeoff roll or destroying a tire on landing. Right rudder counteracts the torque, P-factor, and slipstream effect that together tend to yaw the airplane to the left during takeoff and climb. Unless you're flying a twin with counter-rotating props, you'll need a strong but sensitive right foot on takeoff to keep the airplane going straight. Keep your eyes outside the airplane. We'll never know how many of those loss of control accidents resulted from the pilot being distracted and focusing on something inside the cockpit. Where should you be looking? Not at the center line. You should be looking past the end of the runway to a reference point, a line of trees, say, or whatever's beyond the end of the runway you can aim for. How do you know when to rotate? Again, you'll find the numbers in your POH, but that's not the final answer. First of all, you shouldn't be staring at your airspeed indicator, waiting for a magic number to haul back on the yoke. You have to have a feel for the rotation speed. This is the art of flying. The airspeed indicator will give you a rough idea when you're reaching it. Your airplane will communicate more precisely, but you have to be attuned to get the message. It will feel light and ready to fly. At rotation speed, just enough back pressure is applied to let the plane fly itself off the runway. Some pilots try to peel the airplane off the ground with excessive and premature back pressure. This increases drag, lengthens the takeoff roll, and may result in a stall. Some leave it on the runway too long. This leads to jarring takeoff rolls, nose wheel shimmy, and worn tires. What's the proper pitch for climb out? Between 5 and 10 degrees off the horizon will yield a healthy, positive rate. That's between the first and second horizontal bar over the horizon on the attitude indicator, but your main reference is outside. You should have a mental picture of where that puts the cowl of your aircraft relative to the horizon.
Hi, and welcome back to the show. And now on to your marine forecast. Let's start with the southeast. Looks like the inner channels tomorrow are going to be rather light, 15 knots, with a little bit change of direction from near the Dixon entrance out of the northwest, becoming southeasterly near Petersburg, and then the northern canal we'll see out of the south around 15 knots. The outer waters will mainly be out of the west between 10 and 20 knots, with seas here 5 feet. Across the inner channel, seas will be 3 feet. Looking at your Thursday forecast, again, we're going to see a little bit different changes in direction across the inner channels, with a northwesterly direction, southeasterly near Petersburg, and towards the Dixon entrance, northwesterly. Across the outside waters, primarily a southerly flow to west as you head towards the Dixon entrance, between 10 and 15 knots. Seas will be between 4 and 5 feet. Across the inner channels, expect 2 to 3 feet. Looking across the southeastern, the south and western Gulf areas, looking at winds out of the south around 15 knots, all the way up towards the Prince William Sound, 15 knots. Across the Cook Inlet, between 10 and 20 knots out of the south direction, and 15 knots across Shelikof Strait and the Barren Islands. Looking at seas across the Gulf of Alaska, highest near the western Gulf, between 5 and 6 feet. Prince William Sound, 3 feet, the inlet between 2 and 4 feet, and looking at Shelikof and the Barren Islands, 4 to 5 feet. Looking at your Thursday forecast, we're going to see a change of direction in the winds out of the northerly direction. Gale force winds across much of the Gulf and across even west of the Barren Islands at 35 to 40 knots in locations. Now looking at winds across, we're looking small crafts across Prince William Sound, 20 knots however across the northern inlet, small craft across Shelikof Strait and just south of Kodiak Island. Primarily, like I said, winds are going to be out of the east or northeast direction, 8 to 12 foot seas across the Gulf waters, and then 5 to 8 feet across the inlet and 8 to 9 feet across Shelikof Strait and Barren Islands area. Whittier will see seas getting high as 6 feet tomorrow. Now looking at the, I'm sorry, that was Thursday. Looking at your Wednesday forecast across the Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay will have variable winds out of the south direction across just south of the Alaska Peninsula with seas between 5 and 8 feet, 2 to 3 feet across the Bering side. Looking at your Thursday forecast, primarily a northwesterly flow direction, small crafts just south of Kodiak Island. Seas Bering side 4 to 5 feet, and seas will be 7 feet on Thursday. Now looking at your Aleutian Chain area, winds will primarily be out of the westerly direction, lighter though, between 10 and 20 knots, with seas between 3 and 4 feet on the Bering side and 4 to 5 feet along the North Pacific side. As we head into your Thursday forecast, stronger winds mainly out of the northwesterly and west directions, between 15 and 20 knots, with 25 knots just south of the east and central Aleutians, and as you head towards the central Aleutians, 25 knots. Seas along the Pacific side will be 8 feet on Thursday and between 3 and 6 feet along the Bering side, except towards Shimia near 7 feet. Looking at the west coast, winds will primarily be between 15 and 20 knots with seas between 4 and 6 feet. And then Thursday, just a change of directions across the area between 15 and 20 knots, and seas will be between 4 and 5 feet. Along the northern and northwestern coastal areas, expect stronger winds as you head towards the Beaufort Sea out of the northeasterly direction, primarily at 25 knots there, weaker across towards the Seward Peninsula. Seas between 4 and 6 feet on Wednesday will be between 3 and 5 feet on Thursday. Thursday, a little bit stronger winds continue out of the easterly direction, and as you wrap around. As we look at your forecast one more time, showers will stay in the area across the state, including light showers across the eastern part of the Gulf of Alaska. Well, thank you for staying with us. I'm Kimberly Hefner. We'll see you tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.